John, welcome. Very
Yeah,
nice to meet you.
yeah. Good morning, Sean. Good to see you.
Likewise. Thank you so much for doing this. Just a bit of a chat to understand a bit more about yourself and what you do at Blockchain Exec Council.
Yeah, no, I saw that opportunity that came up last year. What was that, 2020, when everything was going mad? But my interest goes back an awful long way. So I'm not your normal member on the executive council. I'm actually a chartered professional engineer. So I've been a civil engineer for many years, working primarily in the water space.
Okay.
But I've also had this. I've been a fan of technology ever since, for as long as I can remember. So give me a battery and a resistor when I was a 10-year-old, and I'd make something. So it's in my blood.
Oh, so you never thought about being an electrical engineer?
No, it's funny that because my passion was really when I first started studying, it was around the water, and I was really fascinated by water and water management and care of water, because it's one of the essentials of life, and that sort of stuck with me all the way through my career. The blockchain story, however, sort of merges with my passion for water, because it was back in 2017, a conversation between my daughter and I about, if we treated water like we treat money, we wouldn't see the amount of water wastage that we see around the world and even in developing countries. And we thought it wouldn't be great if you had some sort of a ledger for the management of water, so if, you wouldn't lose any people. It was easy to get access to, and it was transparent. And that sort of birthed the idea of this water ledger and the concept of MeterMe Ltd, which is the company that my daughter and I started up in 2018 as a result of that.
Oh, interesting. Because I remember there's an HSBC advertisement overseas I saw one day at an airport, where it had water, the currency of life. And I thought that was actually quite true.
Yeah, that's a great analogy, because we all depend on it, and people, a lot of people around the world see water as a human right, because the rights to access to water change depending on where you live. And as a society, we probably waste 30% of all of the potable, that's the drinking water, that we produce. Imagine that if that was cash. If we lost 30% of the money in the world, there'd be an outcry. So, and that technology is around accounting for those losses, making sure we minimize those losses, and then transacting water on a blockchain ledger. That's starting to happen in some jurisdictions, like in Australia, some irrigation companies. They now have irrigation water on a blockchain, and they transact those access to those water rights via a blockchain platform. So it's very early days. The MeterMe proposal probably goes broader than that, right down to the household meter, where you read your meter through a Bluetooth interaction with your smart meter. It goes onto your cell phone, that's uploaded to a blockchain. You can pay your bill immediately using cryptocurrency, and you do have the opportunity to mine other meter data by walking past meters up and down your street, or when you go on your run. And we're looking at doing a sort of token reward system on the MeterMe platform. So it's in early days of development. COVID came along and disrupted a lot of the work we were doing with partners over in China and India. But we'll come back to that once we can travel again.
Got it. That is an interesting concept, actually, because when you mentioned you're a civil engineer, I'm actually an electrical engineer by trade from Canterbury University. And back in 2017, I was looking at selling electricity to your neighbor, excess electricity from solar panels via your meter, etc. So it's kind of like an analogy to what you're doing with a resource that is so critical. It's a utility, basically, that is part of life: electricity, water. So kind of like a similar analogy that you have there.
Yeah, very similar indeed, Sean. In fact, one of my interests, it took me to Australia back in 2018, where there was a utilities week in Melbourne. And so I took a trip over there, and I thought utilities week, smart metering. And I thought this will be full of blockchain experts. And I got there, and tell you what, I was pretty disappointed. They talk about smart metering, they're still talking about conventional technologies using 3G, 4G, thinking about 5G coming down the road. but they were still looking at conventional, big database, utility type run meter analytics. There was only one speaker there that spoke of blockchain, and that was a company called WePower, who do exactly that same thing. They take green energy used by people who generate electricity from solar panels or wind generators at their home or their business, and they can exchange that on a blockchain peer-to-peer with other members of the WePower network. So they're very early days as well, and I think there's others of very similar nature, but we'll be taking off in the utilities industry, and my guess anyway.
Yeah, I think it's just waiting to happen. It's just a matter of time. So just before we get deeper into blockchain, so if I take a step back, you mentioned that your background is in water as a civil engineer. Water is such a big area. I mean, is it water generation? Is it, I don't know much about water, but what area of water is your background in?
Right. So my area of expertise in water management is in the sort of urban use of water. So that's water for drinking, so potable drinking water supplies, the collection and treatment of wastewater, and the management of stormwater, stuff that lands from the skies, lands on the roads and roofs and green space, and how you manage that and return that safely to the environment without doing any harm along the way. So it really is about the utility of water. Of course, it is a much broader field because we do have things like catchments to manage, and how we manage water in the natural environment, how we use it in the dairying sector. So that's also of interest to me, and I did spend some time as acting chief executive of Water New Zealand last year, which is the peak group for the manage all things water in New Zealand. So they're sort of a peak body, and got quite a large membership, about 2,000 members. So it's a lot of people passionate about water in New Zealand, I can tell you that.
I can imagine so. It's so important. So then, going back to now blockchain, do you remember when you first heard of blockchain or when you came across it?
Yeah, it's hard to put an exact date on it because I watched with interest very early on. I've been a bit of a computer nerd. Going right back to the start of my career, when I was still doing engineering, I took a year out to study computer science at Waikato University, where I got interested in coding, and we were coding in things like
C or Pascal or something.
Fortran, Pascal, there's a few other languages that you now have to go to a rest home to find any coders. But, I was watching that with digital currency, DigiCash, and there's a couple of early ones that came out, and then this blockchain. It sounded to me that with the link between the establishment of the Bitcoin's Satoshi Nakamoto's famous white paper on the blockchain and the Bitcoin technology, and the link between Mt. Gox, Silk Road, and the black market sort of put me off quite a bit in those early days. And so I never really ventured too much into that. I thought that's of interest, but it's not for me. But it wasn't until the sort of age of Ethereum when I started to get really interested in, this sounds much more like it, because Ethereum introduced things like smart contracts as well as the Ether token, and that had utility. That had a lot more utility value for transacting in the real world. Because my passion is not so much cryptocurrency, but real use cases for blockchain technology. So excuse me. So that was my intro, and when I went to that conference in Melbourne back in 2018, I took the opportunity to go to a blockchain meetup in Melbourne. So that was Blockchain Australia, and that was well attended, and it was a fantastic evening. And I thought, well, we must have something similar in New Zealand. And that's when I came back and I made the inquiries, and I put two and two together, and eventually ended up getting onto the Executive Council of Blockchain New Zealand, and picking up some interest and passion projects with this organisation.
Oh, brilliant. Mm-hmm. So now moving forward to, you mentioned your project around metering, is it MeterMe? are you open to talking about that, what that project is, what it does, or it's
Yeah,
still under wraps?
Yeah. So the thing about the metering, the MeterMe project is, well, we've got a couple of other advisors on the board. One of them's a doctor of microbiology, and there's another engineer, and I think he's a mechanical engineer, who's actually on the board of Watercare, who are working on this project, and we're looking to start up a pilot. So this is taking an ultrasonic meter, enabling it with Bluetooth technology to handshake with a mobile phone. And the other trick about this ultrasonic meter technology is that because it has the ability to listen to noise in the pipe, it can actually start hearing things like leak noise. And if you start, and leak noise has a particular wave pattern, and if you're listening at that wave pattern from different locations, you can actually then determine the spatial location of where that leak noise is coming from. And from that, you can actually start identifying leaks in your network when they are small, before they turn into major bursts and breaks. So the other advantage to the utility owner is you have this built-in leak detection technology, which helps drive down that leak loss, which is one of the objectives of MeterMe, is to reduce losses and provide fairness and equity into delivering utility services. It also has applications in the third world where people are unbanked. They don't have access to get a water supply from a utility authority because they don't have an address, they don't have a bank account, but they still need water to live. And so, for example, in India, there's things like public meters where you take a swipe card and your scratch card and you code in the 10 digits, and for that you get your X liters of water delivered. Again, that's awkward. It's frustrating. You've got to make several stops to buy these things and interact with this meter, whereby the MeterMe technology, all you need is a smartphone. And smartphone technology is very accessible to people all over the world and very low cost in some of these developing countries as well, as compared to New Zealand. So that gives access to the unaddressed and the unbanked to actually interact with a water utility to get one of the essentials of life. So that's one of the bigger applications.
Got it.
But to do a real life trial, we're looking at a small town in New Zealand, and of course that's developing that technology and the back end, which is the data processing and building the actual side chain before we actually upload the actual transactions on something like an Ethereum blockchain with a smart contract that would execute bill payments.
So it sounds like are there two components? Is one component the payment for the water, like a payment method using your smartphone, and is the other concept the recording of the water meter on the blockchain?
Yeah, so you can actually take. So we don't need all that data to be sitting on a blockchain. All we want to do is to understand the movement of water as it comes through the network. So we have meters at the source, so we know how much is entering a system. We have meters on the network, so we know how much water is going into each branch. We have meters on each domestic connection, so we know how much then is being delivered to each customer. And from that, you can calculate what your losses are and start to identify where they are and reduce the costs. And it's just those times and volumes that would go onto this immutable record, which means we have an immutable record of where the water has been extracted, where it's been delivered, and even when you return it back to the environment, about how much is being discharged. And because at the moment, if there was a question asked by TV reporters some years ago, I recall, asking that information from regional councils, and they struggled to answer the question. How much water is there? How much do we use? How much do we lose? And how much gets put back into the environment? And what state is it in? What quality is it? So there's lots of questions, and I think there's a solution in there that's quite elegant using a blockchain technology.
Interesting, because like you say, those questions are so fundamental and so basic, actually. Ah.
Yeah, it's surprising that it's very difficult to answer them because there's so many players and so many people in involved in water distribution, treatment, and consumption.
Do you know of any other competitors or any other parties in this field?
Yeah, there are a few getting involved in that. I know that even in Victoria and in Southwest Water, they're experimenting with this type of technology, and smart metering and it is happening elsewhere. Singapore have just rolled out a whole 5-6 million smart meters, but using conventional backhaul technology for the data. The company in Australia, I think they're using vibration sensors rather than audio acoustic sense for detecting leaks. So there are some different ways of approaching it. But again, it's like anything at this stage of development. There will be an emerging technology that sort of wins the day.
Yeah, got it. So then now leading to the BlockchainNZ Council, how did you find yourself coming on board?
Well, I think I saw that. It might have been on the Institute of Directors website, or I'm not even sure where, because I am a member of the Institute of Directors and I've got a couple of other directorships and a bit of governance experience. And I was probably on the lookout for something like that anyway. And when I saw that come up, I just chucked in my CV and hoped for the best. And Victoria contacted me, but I think it was last August, July, August last year. Said, yeah, we've got a spot. Are you interested? And I said, absolutely. So, and then she said, most of the executive council members do have what they call passion projects. So, what is it that you're passionate about? And of course, mine is about using real-world applications for blockchain technology. And that really came about from an article in a boardroom magazine back in would have been 2018. This one to be sure.
Oh wow!
Blockchain, the game changer, yeah. And so that sort of alerted me to the need at the board level. Is that there's a lot of people sitting on executive boards and governance boards around the country who have not one idea about blockchain technology, what it's capable of, and even worse, what their competitors might be doing with it. So there's two things you can do. You can get involved and start identifying what blockchain can do for your business, or wait for your competitors to do something and then you respond to whatever they do, which puts you on the back foot. So that was one of the passion projects was about digital education for executives and governance bodies. And I wouldn't mind talking about that because I don't see this much in the area of governance or training and blockchain at that governance level. So we'll see what happens if there's something that comes of that. Does it work out economically? Is there a business case for it? But so that's an interesting discussion we can have at the Executive Council.
Well, that leads nicely. It segues into, I was going to ask, what are your passion projects and your main role at the Exec Council? And it sounds like it is the digital education.
Yeah, so that is the one that I've been focused on, and the water ledger for the practical application and the digital education program, particularly for directors. And there are some new ones coming out that from different universities and institutions around the world on getting certified blockchain experts. So there was a couple of emerging courses that people can undertake. But that's probably at the high end of, because I think all that board level people need is a general understanding of what the technology is, what it can do, and how it might apply to their business. They don't need to know how the SHA-256 actually works and how the coding works. They just need to know what it can do for their business.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I remember 2 years ago, I went to Papua New Guinea to speak at the a 1-hour presentation at the Bank of South Pacific's AGM. All the directors flew in mainly from Australia, and they were just, as part of their annual strategy, they wanted to know more about blockchain at a very high level. What it does, who are the competitors in the area? So because they were in Papua New Guinea and the Philippines, Union Bank invested heavily into blockchain. to enable all the islands around them to transact on the ledger very quickly. So they were very keen to understand at a very high level, like you say. So I think there's you're opening up an opportunity here, because a lot of the board members really want to know in order to make strategic decisions going forward.
Yeah. So and it's about and you're quite right. It's about a general knowledge of blockchain, not what the expert knowledge is. Because I've been going to these meetups in Christchurch for some years, even before I was on the Blockchain Council. There's been a monthly meetup here locally, and the people who come along are absolutely passionate. They're predominantly cryptocurrency gurus, and there's one or two blockchainers, but their knowledge is very detailed. They've got so much information, but of course, at the present time, they're the exception rather than the rule. And what we're looking for is that mid-level, just that broad understanding, take away the ignorance, Bitcoin and the dark web, that association that people jump to. we need to sort of burst that image of the technology, and that's where I think this general knowledge might be able to come and help that. And it's starting to happen out there in the real world, and even in that boardroom magazine, the Fonterra, for example, have started to adopt looking at blockchain opportunities. And they signed a memorandum of understanding with Alibaba back in 2017 to develop a blockchain platform to strengthen their supply chain in order to avoid things like food fraud. And we don't have to talk too much about the baby formula issue to understand how that would benefit Fonterra as an organization and the world in generally when it comes to getting a surety around where things come from. And that's one use case.
So you mentioned about blockchain itself and not the actual cryptocurrency, but do you often find that when you're talking about blockchain to various people, that inevitably people start talking about the price of Bitcoin?
Yeah, it is very difficult to try and unstitch that association. And of course, the volatility is what puts a lot of people off, as well as even investing in crypto as an investment strategy. Even I keep it as a percentage of my overall portfolio. I haven't gone heavy into it, but it's there, and it's making some very nice gains over the last 3 months, I must add. But again, yeah, it's like the analogy between when the internet was born, and getting them to understand that the killer app on the internet was email. So, and the killer app in blockchain is at the start was Bitcoin. So, and the way I express it to people is that email is to internet as Bitcoin is to blockchain. It rides on the platform, and of course, we're probably in relation to the internet development, we're probably around 1996, 97 at the moment. This thing has a way to go before we get that wholesale adoption.
Yeah, got it. With your project, I forgot to ask, are you going to introduce a token, as everyone does nowadays?
That was part of our thinking. And one of the reasons for raising a token, and we're just taking some advice on that, would be some form of utility token, and the idea is that could actually be a security token in order to raise the capital to invest in the meter network, because moving to a smart meter network is an expensive exercise, and most utilities just can't come up with the $10-20 million they need to put in a whole fleet of meters. So what you would do, you could do an initial coin offering with an equity offering that allows people to invest in the technology and tokenize the model, so that they actually then can share in the value of that token over time. And people say, oh, that's privatizing water. Well, in actual fact, it's not really, because it's just a method of funding. It's not privatizing the utility. And so that's the other barrier that we have, is that P word. People think that they, especially in New Zealand and UK, and Scotland, because England have already privatized their water business. But we need to, it's just another means of raising capital. and it gets mum and dad shareholders into having a stake in a utility business, which is not a bad thing.
Got it. General random question here. With water meters, are they the typical mechanical meters at the moment, or are they smart yet?
Yeah, well, there's a mix of both. So the majority of meters, particularly in New Zealand, are mechanical meters. They've just got an impeller, they spin, they've got moving parts. The technology is 200 years old. So it's about time things need to change. The ultrasonic meters that replace them are quite unique because they've got no moving parts, and they use an ultrasonic signal. They fire a signal in one direction, and there's a microphone and a receiver at the other end, and there's when one sensor fires, the other one fires in the opposite direction, and the time delay between the upstream and downstream signals being received is a function of the velocity going through the meter body. And knowing the cross-sectional area, you can calculate the flow. And it doesn't vary over time. Mechanical meters tend to slow down with age. So the actual fact, the utility owners getting less revenue than they're probably otherwise entitled to. But the problem with the ultrasonic meter, they take power. And so most of them are battery powered. And while the batteries last 10, 12, 15 years, if you start chatting to a Bluetooth cell phone, you can actually chew through that battery life a lot quicker. So we're working on developing other battery technologies or improving battery technology through things like graphene. I mean, there's some great technologies out there that are really improving the capability of batteries to store a great amount of power and charge really quickly. So that's a moving feast. But current technology, yeah, these meters wouldn't last too long talking over Bluetooth. So that's the other technical issue that we need to solve as part of this project.
Got it. Got it.
Where that.
When you mentioned measuring water flow or determining the flow, it reminded me back in engineering school about Bernoulli's equation. I don't know what it is, but I remember it.
Yeah, buoyancy. Yeah, well, this is just a very basic, in hydraulic theory, it's the continuity equation, Q equals VA, you know, the quantity of water equals the velocity times the cross-sectional area. So that's really the basis of it. The leak noise correlation is a little more tricky because you have to think about the velocity of sound and water and the time delay between two different points. That's easy to do on a spatial thing like a spatial map like GIS. You can do those calculations. So the back end stuff is just a bit of arithmetic and mathematics, but the fundamentals are quite cool. And some of the technology challenges are a bit challenging.
Yeah, you can tell that we've got two engineers talking here. So yeah, because back in 2001, I worked at a company called Total Metering down in Wellington. That was eventually bought out by Vector Energy, and we were doing smart meters at that time. And even now, I think over the last 10 to 15 years, particularly in New Zealand with electricity, the smart meters have been rolled out to a lot of households across New Zealand. So it's very common for the smart meters, but it's good to hear about the water, and even maybe the gas.
Yeah, exactly right. And gas and electricity, they sort of led the way in developing this technology. And even here in Christchurch, I've got a smart power meter at my home. But the problem is they're using the power of smart meters in a dumb way. I'm not seeing any of that data. So all it does is save them sending around a meter guy. But with the smart meter, I'm talking about water, it means that you can see your daily consumption. You can set your daily targets. You can set your cost. If you're in a flat, you can then start picking on people who are having long showers, and you say, we use so much water. So, and people like to get engaged with their utilities more and more, especially young people, I've noticed. And but I think if you're going to use a smart meter, you've got to give that information to your customer, which a lot of electricity companies aren't doing right now.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, I believe you can request it, but that's a process in itself.
Yeah, I mean, it's an app. You can put it on your phone or your iPad. And some do. I must admit, some are very good at that.
Yeah. just going back to blockchain here, if I could rack your brains in terms of some crystal ball gazing, where do you see this technology? I mean, next 3, 5, 10 years time from your perspective?
Ooh, reminds me of a story. that someone asked Heinrich Hertz that question back in 1888. Hertz developed the first discovered radio frequencies. It set up a transmitter and a receiver. He broadcast a signal from one to the other, and he was famously asked, what could this be used for? He says, nothing. It's got absolutely no useful purpose whatsoever. He had no idea that radio frequencies was going to change the world. And I think we're at that stage right now. The exciting part about blockchain and the technologies and even cryptocurrencies and what's happening in the DeFi or decentralized finance area is that we have no idea where this thing can go. And that's the interesting, and even the regulators struggle. I'm just watching the SEC lawsuit against Ripple at the moment, and how they're using this 45-year-old securities legislation in the USA. And of course, back in it was more than 45 years. It was like back in 1933 or something. It's so old, the legislation that didn't even foresee cryptocurrency, anything of the sort, and they're trying to shoehorn these rules around cryptocurrencies around outdated legislation. So we need to be more practical in where we think this technology can go. Will it replace fiat currency? Who knows? And I couldn't really predict from this particular point, where the opportunities are, but I know they're going to be there. And some of the biggest opportunities we're probably not even aware of yet.
Yeah, true. Speaking of Ripple, I mean, I remember when the SEC made an announcement, the price was at 50 cents, dropped by half, but now it's gone to like $1 or something, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's over $1. Yeah.
Nuts.
And then some. So who knows? And it sounds like the latest article I read that it's not Ripple that's on trial, it's the SEC who's actually on trial with all the discovery and some of the goings on between the people working on the case who have now moved on to things like Apollo Capital Management. And this appears to be some conflicts of interest that could prove embarrassing. So interesting to watch this roll out in real life.
Awesome. Cool. Well,
yeah.
One final thing before we wrap up. I can't let you go without asking you about your very interesting background there with a couple of guitars and some Beatles fans. So, are you a guitar player?
Yeah, well, I am. That's the other thing I started when I was very young. An interest in music and a real Beatles fan from way back. That's why I haven't blurred my background, because it becomes a talking point with all the Zoom calls I go on. So it just lets people know who I am. But back in 2015, there was a worldwide contest run by the Beatles Story, which is the museum in Liverpool of all things Beatles. And they were they've been running for 25 years, and they were looking for 25 worldwide ambassadors to actually spread the word about the Beatles Story in Liverpool, grow their business and grow their brand. And I put my hand up, and I was made a Beatles Story ambassador for New Zealand. So that was pretty cool. So I've been back there a couple of times, and I've got free entry for life, a nice letter from the Mayor of Liverpool and saying thanks for your support and all sorts. So that's pretty cool. And I've got a Hofner bass there, which is the Paul McCartney style, and that's about a 1962 vintage, which is quite a collectible. So it makes interesting talking point.
Wow, it certainly does. And you're right about the background. But yeah, so thank you very much for your time. It's been an absolute fascinating story chatting with you and learning more about what you do.
Yeah, that's great, Sean. I'm happy to be tell my tale, or my rabbit hole story in Bitcoin, and it goes on. So that's how I'm spending my time these days, being sort of semi-retired. I still do a bit of consulting, particularly in the water space. We're going through some big reforms, but the rest of my time is not so much trading on shares and cryptocurrency, but mainly buying. I'm just looking for buy opportunities. I haven't sold any yet, and I don't plan to.
Yeah, it's an amazing time. It's like, when the internet wave started in the 1990s, 2000s, that was like the first wave, and I kind of like missed out on that. But riding this wave, to me, I find it's a privilege to be part of.
Yeah, and it's never too late to get started, and that's my philosophy. If you think that we should have got in 6 months ago, get over it. The time is now. The decisions you make today are the ones you're going to be thanking yourself for.
Yeah, too right. Awesome. Thank you very much for that, John. And I'll catch you later.
Thanks, Sean. See you soon.
Bye.